Welcome to the 2022 Virginia Festival of the Book, presenting a virtual school visit with MK England. I'm Sarah Lawson, Associate Director of the Virginia Center for the Book, a program of Virginia Humanities. Thanks for joining us. A couple notes before we begin. You can share your questions for the author using the Q&A tab on Zoom, and we will get to as many as possible at the end of today's event. This event also has optional closed captioning, which you can turn on and customize at any time with the tab at the bottom of your Zoom window. Also, if you'd like to rewatch this event later, it will be available along with other videos from festival speakers at vabook.org/watch. Now, I'm pleased to introduce today's author. MK England, author of The One True Me and You, lives in a small house in rural Virginia packed with video games, dogs, plants, Star Wars memorabilia, and one tiny human. In their brand new novel, The One True Me and You, up-and-coming fanfic author Kaylee Beaumont is internally screaming at the chance to finally meet her fandom friends in real life and spend a weekend at Great Con. Pageant queen Tegan Miller has her eye on a $25,000 scholarship. When Tegan and Kay meet each other, sparks fly. Their connection is intense, as is their shared enemy. If they're spotted, the safe space of the con will be shattered, and all their secrets will follow them home. The risks are great, but could the reward of embracing their true selves be worth it? A big-hearted, joyful romance and a love letter to all things geek, The One True Me and You is a celebration of standing up for and being yourself. MK, thanks so much for being here.
Yay, thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here. And thank you to the Festival of the Book for organizing these talks. So I am MK England. I'm a Virginia author, and I'm just kind of kicking it around the cow fields down here south of Charlottesville. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about my work today, about being an author who manages to make books happen despite crushing anxiety that makes the entire process agonizing. So I'm going to share some slides here so you can see all of my pretty book covers. There we go. So that's me, author of books about anxious messes who save the world. So I want to start off today by talking a little bit about who I am as an adult now, theoretically an adult, and who I was as a teen, for reasons that I hope will become clear when you see what my books are really about. So this is me as a theoretical grown-up. I read lots of books. This should not be shocking considering what I do for a living. Though I almost entirely read in audio these days because I have a 1-year-old and because I have some attention issues that make it really hard to just stare at a page of print. It's almost impossible. But I read sci-fi, fantasy, graphic novels, contemporary romance. All of that stuff is like my catnip. I love it. I also garden and I bake and I live out in the country where I can be an introvert in peace. It's wonderful. I am a giant fandom nerd, as you may have guessed from that description of my latest book. And I read and write fan fiction when the time allows. It does not allow very often these days, but it is still a big part of who I am. And I am a gamer. In every possible way that you can be a gamer, I am. I play tabletop board games, I play video games, lots of video games, play role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons, whatever I can squeeze in, it is a big part of me. I was also a public librarian for almost 10 years, and I left that field less than a year ago to focus on my new kid and my increasingly terrifying publishing deadlines. As of 1 year ago, I only had 2 books out, and now this year there will be 6 of those book babies. So things got a little intense for a bit. I love my life and I know myself so much better than I used to, and I love myself a whole lot more than I did when I was young. So that is me now. This is me when I was a teen. It is not significantly different. I still devoured books, though never actually anything that was assigned. I am so sorry, teachers. Bleep this part out, I guess. I was just super uninterested in reading classics, but I absolutely crushed any sort of choose your own reading challenge. My very long-suffering parents didn't love that I read nothing but sci-fi, fantasy, and comic books, but I think I turned out fine. It worked out. I was a huge band geek. I actually went on to major in music in college, and I played classical clarinet and all kinds of things. It was a whole other life I had before books. I still actually gardened when I was a kid and a teen, whenever our rented houses had space for it. I read fanfic, but I definitely did not write it because sharing my writing was terrifying, as we'll talk about later. It took me a long time to get to that point. I absolutely loved the musical Rent. I was obsessed, specifically because it was one of the only things that I knew about in the late 90s, early 2000s that had overtly queer content. And it took me a while to realize why I loved it. I played video games endlessly, just like I do now. And it was a big way that I connected with my friends. So at the time, video games were a very gendered hobby, which was not cool and very derided. And I just fully embraced my nerddom. Star Wars was quite possibly the biggest influence in my entire life. I have an entire bookcase of Star Wars books that's just off camera over there. And most of those were purchased when I was a kid or a teen. And this one pictured here on the slide is one of my absolute favorites that was a huge influence on my first published book, The Disasters. So, this was me as a teen. I was one of those kids that got pretty good grades. I didn't get into a whole lot of trouble that anyone knew about. So everybody thought I was fine. In fact, I was actually dealing with a lot, with trauma, with abuse from peers, with being a semi-closeted queer kid who had no idea what was going on, with being so uncomfortable with gender and having no language to understand why. So even on the surface, though, I was pretty similar to how I am now. There was still a lot of other stuff going on. So I tell you all of that to give you context for my books and how I hope that they relate to readers. So let me give you a quick tour. The Disasters is my debut YA novel. It's basically be gay, do crimes in space. 5 teens who failed out of Space Academy on their very first day all get framed when the academy falls to a terrorist attack. They end up on the run with a mission to clear their names and hopefully not kill each other. This one's been optioned for TV and is currently in development at Netflix. We will see if the TV show ever actually exists, but in theory, they're trying. Spell Hacker was my second book, also a YA novel, and that one features a found family of misfits, but this time it is in a high-tech sci-fi world with magic in it. So kind of genre smashy book. There are heists, there's a friend group that's about to break up before going to college, and there's a main character who cannot have a feeling to save her life, much less talk about it. Yes, she is me as a teen. It was very bad. Next up came the Guardians of the Galaxy novel, No Guts, No Glory, which is a prequel novel to the video game that just came out this past October. If you have not played this game and you're into games at all, please play it. You will love it. There's a reason it's winning tons of awards. It's fantastic. And it's specifically winning a lot of awards for its story, which is so good. The developers put so much love and time and care into creating their very own version of the Guardians of the Galaxy. So even if you've never seen any of the movies, even if you've never read any of the comics, it's not set in either one of those universes. So it stands totally alone, and you don't have to play the game to read the book. But I think they both make each other better. So this one was a lot of fun, and there's a lot of little inside nods for the people who are fans. The One True Me and You is the one that you heard at the top of the hour. That one just came out last week. It is only 8 days old. And it is my first YA contemporary novel. So everything else up till now has been sci-fi fantasy. This one is set modern day real world. And it's different because it's under a super stealthy pen name that you would never guess is me. It's Remy K. England instead of MK England. Completely different, obviously. So that one is the story of the inevitable meet cute that happens when an Orlando hotel plays host to a small fandom convention and a teen beauty pageant in the same weekend. Designed to give you all of the warm, fuzzy feels, it is big and triumphant and happy and short and quick, which I think is a bonus these days. And then I have 2 more coming up later this year. It's a busy year, y'all. Player versus Player Ultimate Gaming Showdown is my middle grade debut. So this one's for, kind of younger ages, 8 to 12-ish. It is about 4 kids who play an online arena game called Affinity. And they all have different gamer issues. So like Josh's parents disapprove of gaming. Hannah has no internet and has to play at the public library. Larkin has to hide her gaming from everyone in her life. And Wheatley just has like a whole thing going on that could wreck the entire team. So these 4 kids are some of the best players in the game, and they get invited to an invitational tournament with some incredible prizes and a big surprise at the end for winners. So like gamer nerd me is just so excited to have this trilogy coming out. And then finally, Firefly, What Makes Us Mighty. Both of these books are coming out in June. It's my own spin on the universe from the Firefly TV show. If you know Firefly, then you know, you get the idea. And if you don't, then you probably don't care. So now that you know all 6 of my books as they exist right now, and you have a quick reminder of who I was as a teenager, then you have the full context for who I am as an author and what I'm trying to communicate to my readers. I am admittedly not the author that you go to for beautifully written metaphor or deep pondering on the important issues of life. Those things are wonderful and moving, and there are a lot of really important books out there that can give you those things. My books probably do not give you those things. That's just not my wheelhouse. It's not what I'm good at writing, not what I enjoy writing, you know? What I hope to deliver instead is a reading experience that I, as that queer, nerdy, anxious as heck, Star Wars loving gamer child, would have loved and felt seen by and felt validated by. You know, like I had a place in the universe where I didn't just exist, but I could be the hero and I could fly the spaceship and I got to go on adventures, you know, where my love of video games wasn't derided and looked down upon by the adults in my life, you know, where I got to have a purely joyful, happy ending with the person of my dreams, no matter what their gender. So when you look at these 6 books that I've put out into the world or that are coming into the world soon, what I hope you'll see is a way in for you or for the people in your life. There's so many ways into these books. There's space. I'm a giant space nerd. I mean, you would never guess by my background. There's sci-fi magical heists. There's fandom and queer joy. There's comics and movies. There is, of course, video games. And there's sci-fi TV fandom, if that's your thing. So pick your door and come on in. So let's talk about brains for a minute. Now that you know what my work is like, I want to tell you how that work actually came to be and the things that stood in the way of me getting it to you. So anxiety kept me from actually trying to write for a long time. And if I'm honest, it still tries on a fairly regular basis. Clearly I'm here though, so I did manage to figure some stuff out. It can take time though to figure out that maybe your brain isn't quite treating you the way it should. Sometimes it comes on quietly and it seems like it's just self-doubt. And everybody has self-doubt sometimes, right? So here's how my kind of arc of being a writer went from very young to current day. In elementary and middle school, writing was awesome and I loved it. I devoured books. I lived in the school library. I, loved making my own books for every school project that gave me the chance to do it. But perfectionism was already settling in. I got selected for this young authors conference thingy that they did at my elementary school, where they sent 2 kids from every class to go have their books judged and go to a little event in the library and all of that stuff. Here is the proof that I have, in fact, always been like this. And my stunning work of staggering genius, Space Adventure: A Trip to Mars, sadly did not win. I was not even a finalist. I was definitely an anxious perfectionist by then, though. So, but when I started specifically to think at this moment, like, oh, maybe my writing isn't good. Maybe I love to do it, but nobody wants to read it because it's bad. Which is ridiculous because there were like minimum 20 people, in the running for this top spot, and not being the top person out of 20 is fine. I would never judge a friend of mine for that or think that they weren't a good writer or something. I would reassure them. I would say, hey, you're great, But for me at the time, not being the best meant I was the worst. And it was the beginning of my lifelong anxiety spiral. I'm not going to say it's all down to this Young Authors Conference or anything, but it's like the first time that I really remember thinking like, oh, I'm a bad writer. I should never show anybody my writing ever again. So, then we moved on to high school eventually. And by the time I got to high school, I was fully dug in on that way of thinking. Like I got compliments from my teachers on my creative writing assignments, but the creative writing class always conflicted with band, so I was never going to be able to get in there. And you had to like submit something and be accepted to that class. And clearly I was garbage and was never going to be able to get past that. So I just couldn't stand for anybody to actually see what I was writing anyway. So I just used that excuse and said, oh, well, I can't because band, so I'm just never going to write anything and show it to anyone ever, if at all possible. And then I went to college. There was just a lot of other stuff going on. Like I was a music major, but I worked at a bookstore through most of college, and I came home from my shifts. I worked at Books A Million, so we had those silly like apron things, and my apron pockets were just loaded down with like receipts and little scraps of paper, where I would just scribble like a character idea or a little line of dialogue, or something about how like the magic system for a fantasy world could be built. It was all very tropey stuff, I'm sure, but like at the time I was like, oh, so many ideas. And I just came home and did absolutely nothing with them. For a while I had a shoebox full of these little ideas, and I just never did anything with it, because as soon as I sat down and said, oh, well, what does this dialogue go to? What does this magic system belong in? What kind of world, what kind of story? I would immediately close up and say, you're not good enough to do this. Why are you bothering? Why do you try? Stop bringing home these scraps of paper, because you're never going to do anything with it. And I let them go, and I never did anything with it. So eventually I got to early adulthood. I graduated college, I went to grad school, and I was like, I don't know, like I keep thinking about writing. Maybe I should just give it a try. Nobody has to see it. I could just try. And then I immediately realized that that was a terrible idea. Nobody could ever know, and nobody could ever see anything that I had ever written. And I immediately had to delete all possible evidence that it had happened. And that's kind of where we're still at. Even though there are, in fact, actual books with my words in them that people see with their eyeballs, I kind of have to disconnect from that process and pretend it doesn't exist. I just repeat those last two steps forever and ever on repeat. I don't know if I will ever exit that loop or not. Might just be the way my brain works. Now I know to expect it, though, and I know that there are ways to retrain your brain and to work with your brain when it is being a jerk to you. So I in addition to going to therapy and like figuring out that I had anxiety disorders and OCD and all kinds of stuff that was getting in my way, like, by the end of that timeline, I knew there was something actually wrong about the way that I was thinking about writing and about a lot of stuff and about myself. It's really easy to get trapped in those unhelpful thinking patterns, like physically stuck in those patterns, because your brain is full of these little pathways, and the ones that you use the most are like hiking trails. The ones that you walk the most, they're the well-worn trails. There's nothing falling down over the trail, very easy to get through. That's your automatic choice for what path you want to go down. And the ones that you don't use are, the paths where maybe like you should bring a machete or something. So if the way you talk to yourself is more like, you're the worst, why are you trying? Then those are the pathways in your brain that are the well-worn roads. That's the path that your brain is going to want to take the most easily, because that's the way it knows how to go. That's the way you've trained your brain to think. But the good news is you can actually work to clear those other trails, and you can let those other ones get overgrown and go unused. It takes a lot of work. I'm not there yet. I've made enough progress that I can actually finish a book and show it to people who know things about books and go through this whole excruciating process of bringing a book into the world for other people to put their eyeballs on. But, it's still there, and I still push through it all the time, but I have made progress. Now I notice, at least, when my brain is going down the you're the worst path. And instead, I redirect my brain and say, hey, let's go over here. Let's just, maybe this is actually good. Maybe you're not terrible. Maybe you've published books before and you can keep doing it. And in fact, that is the kind of thinking that finally got me to really try at writing. Finishing that first book, not even the one that got published, I mean the very first book, the awful tropey fantasy novel we all have living inside of us that is just a regurgitation of all of the things that you've read. Finishing that book is what led to every other book that I've written. Because once I did it, once I got to the end of that very first book, I knew I could do it again. The path had been worn. So I could say, every time my brain started to spiral into the, you're the worst, why are you trying? I'd say, no, come back this way. We've done it before. We can do it again. Just keep trying, keep your eye on the prize, and I kept at it, and I did eventually get there. Being published is not a straight line. There were a lot of ups and downs between the disasters coming out and then this year, where I have 3 books coming out. There were times where I thought my career was totally over. And if I hadn't really taken the time to work on my brain and work on my anxiety and work on understanding the way I talk to myself and the way I relate to writing, I don't know if I would have gotten here, but I did. I got here eventually, and I'm still a work in progress. I'm still pushing through it. And I'm telling stories to make sure that you and everybody else know that you can push through it too. Because this is what my books are really about. There's the disasters. And I'm going to spoil the endings for all of these books for you. Not in a major way, in a very, very minor way. These characters, they're all going to be okay. The disasters, there are 2 characters with major anxiety, and I wanted to write 2 of them specifically so I could show that there is no one way to be an anxious mess. Anxiety looks so different in different people. One person might have one style of anxiety that presents itself one way, and another person could be completely different. One person can crumble under pressure, and one person can be totally smooth sailing and cool under pressure, and then panic afterwards. There's lots of ways to be anxious, and you can still save the galaxy regardless. In my second book, Spell Hacker, the main character Diz is deeply traumatized by some things that have happened in the world of this book. And she experiences PTSD symptoms, and she is also still very deeply anxious. They saved the world too. They got through it. In The One True Me and You, the one that just came out last week, there's gender dysphoria. There is a main character who is questioning their gender, trying to figure out if maybe they, them pronouns are going to be more comfortable and appropriate for them. There's grief, dealing with the loss of a parent. But on top of all of that, there is joy and triumph, and both of these characters finding who they are and coming to embrace themselves and finding a good place for both of them, both together and separately. They find their joy. in player versus player, there is a lot of fear and anxiety. These kids are younger, but just because you are 13 or less doesn't mean that you can't be dealing with anxiety. And so these kids are going through the process of, a big pressure situation, playing a video game at a professional level in front of thousands and thousands of people. It's a big deal and it's a lot to cope with. And even still, through it, they find success and they find friendship and they manage to come together. In Guardians of the Galaxy, No Guts, No Glory, and in Firefly, I mean, these are kind of not my books, they are what we call IP. They're intellectual property books. They belong to somebody else. But even in these books that were not technically mine, I still find a way to put my fingerprints all over them. Through PTSD and trauma and grief, making sure that these characters in these big action films don't just, go, oh yeah, we were part of a war, a couple of years back, but now everything's fine because we have space adventures. Those things can all be true. We can be fine and have space adventures and still actually grapple with, the implications of our mental health. And spoiler alert, both of these teams save the day at the end of their respective books. I have been on a long journey to get here, and I'm going to keep doing this. I'm going to keep telling these stories. I'm going to keep looking for every opportunity, even when it's in other people's universes like Marvel or Firefly. I'm going to figure out a way to make sure that I always get this point across, that weird, queer video game loving nerds can find their place in the universe and go on adventures and have their own spaceships and just rock out and have a great ending and save the day. So there are wonderful endings for everybody in this universe. So that is me. I am about to go on social media hiatus right now while I meet some deadlines, but I am most active on Instagram when I do exist. My very irregular newsletter, the link is here if you want to join it. I pretty much only remember to actually send it out when I have a new book coming out, so I will not spam you much. And then all of the books pictured here are available wherever books are sold. 2 of them are not out yet, Player versus Player and Firefly. Those both come out in June. One True Me and You just came out last week, so everything is out there if you want it. And that's what I got. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I think we have some questions.
MK, thank you. That was wonderful. You are amazingly good at talking about and writing about anxiety, which I know is something that, most of us feel at one time or another. And it's just really great to hear you explain the process and your own motivations for doing that. So we do have questions, and actually let's start with something super specific to your latest book, and then we'll go more general. But could you talk a little bit about why you chose a Sherlock Holmes fandom for the book?
Yeah, sure. So I have been in many, many fandoms throughout the years, and a surprising number of them have been Holmes related. And when it came time to choose a fandom to put into this book, I was thinking like, oh, I could do this, I could do that, but like anything is going to seem dated by the time the book comes out. And that's when I thought, oh, Sherlock Holmes is the very obvious answer here. There's been a Sherlock Holmes fandom since the late 1800s. There's always a new adaptation. There's the original stories, and then there were movies, and then there was the 80s Granada TV show, and then there was the Robert Downey Jr. movies. There's Elementary, there's the BBC Sherlock, there's new ones coming out all the time. So to me, that was maybe the least far-fetched option. Was, of course, there will one day be another Sherlock Holmes adaptation, and this one is actually secretly kind of my own little adaptation that one day I was very in my feelings and angry about BBC Sherlock. And I was like, I'm gonna write my own modern day Sherlock Holmes adaptation and it's gonna be better. And I outlined the whole first novel. I figured out how I was going to adapt everything. I got maybe 5 or 6 chapters into it. And then I realized, man, I do not know how to write mysteries. I need to stick to spaceships because I don't know what I'm doing. But I did keep all of the, like, I pulled out all of the minor female characters from the original Arthur Conan Doyle stories. And, I made Violet Hunter an awesome hacker girl. And, just really, I did a lot of stuff that I wish I saw in other adaptations. So I was excited to give that, idea that I loved so much, but will never be able to execute a tiny home in this book.
That is awesome. Thank you. On the flip side, you have a lot about pageant life and pageant girls, and that seems very antithetical to most of what you've talked about today. So tell us about how you chose that and how you did research and kind of learned what you wanted to include there.
Yes. So this book is very loosely based on a real scenario, not a real situation as far as I know, but I went to a small fandom convention back in 2015, and it was in fact Sherlock Holmes related. And my friends and I walked into the lobby of this hotel, and there were people in sparkly dresses everywhere. And we went, what's going on? There was, in fact, a beauty pageant at the hotel. So we all looked at each other and were like, so who's going to write this fic? Because obviously there's a fanfic happening right now in this hotel. So I did, in fact, go back the next year and write that fic. So that's kind of the scenario here. That's where the idea came from. As far as I know, there were no actual whirlwind weekend romances that happened at that convention. Maybe there were, and I didn't know about it. But that's what inspired me to delve into this world of pageants, which was something that I had a lot of negative associations with and a lot of bad assumptions about. And I really knew nothing about it. If I'm completely honest, I knew nothing about it. And being somebody who, like, as a non-binary adult, when I was a teen, I didn't have that language. Like, I didn't even get the word non-binary until I was in my late 20s, maybe, or maybe 30. So as a teen, all I knew was that gender made me angry, and people kept trying to put me in dresses, and it made me mad, and it led me down kind of a bad path of hating everything that was feminine, and thinking that people that wore dresses and makeup were stupid. And those are not healthy or appropriate things to think. That is deeply unfeminist and deeply misogynistic. And it took me years to unlearn that stuff. So once I had done that work on myself, I looked at this scenario and said, like, I really need to learn why people do pageants and what they see that is positive in them, what they get out of pageants, and what makes people love it. Because it can't just be this surface level thing that I assumed it was. Fortunately, my literary agent at the time happened to be an ex-pageant girl, which did not come out until I pitched this idea. So I got to interview her a little bit, but she was maybe 10 or 15 years removed from the pageant system at that time. So I went down a huge rabbit hole of research to try and figure out, like, what is it actually like right now? And by right now, I mean, I wrote this book in 2016, so like 6 or 7 years ago. And I read interviews, I watched like 1,000 YouTube videos. Like, my personalized ads on the internet were very strange for quite a while. And I watched entire pageants on YouTube. There's a lot of videos out there for you to watch. So I just really dove deep to see, like, what do the people who do pageants actually say about them, and what do they say about them publicly, and what do they say about them on an anonymous Reddit AMA, ask me anything kind of thread. And I got a really varied impression. So I hope the feedback I've gotten about the book so far, at least, is that I was able to show the good side and the bad side, the sisterhood and the surface level appreciation of beauty, the ambition and the objectification. There's a lot that goes on there, but it's not all bad. So yeah, it was a fascinating learning experience for sure.
Excellent, thank you. So you mentioned sisterhood, and that kind of ties into another theme of just like really strong friend groups that seem to appear in all of your books.
Yes.
Could you talk a little bit about why that's so important to you to include?
Yeah, for sure. It really is, and this only occurred to me very recently, but that sort of like found family and strong friend group thing, friends that are family that always have your back. It really is in every book I write. And I think it means a lot to me for a lot of reasons. Growing up, my family wasn't particularly close. And so I kind of had to seek out that closeness elsewhere. But like I mentioned, I was not the best person as a teen. I was, looking for friendship in all the wrong places. I was confused. I was angry. I didn't know who I was. And I mean, does anybody really at that age or ever? But so I feel like I didn't make those connections early on. And I found my first sort of friend group like that in college. And then we dispersed to the four winds and, West Coast, East Coast, like, impossible to keep in touch. And, and then I found another group, but then I moved and I spent my entire 20s moving like every year and a half, maybe 2 years. So it just was impossible for me to put down roots and find my people who I could be around and, love and trust and be part of that kind of group. So I think just the not having it for so long made me want to write it into all of my books. And because it was the thing that I loved about Star Wars and Firefly and Guardians of the Galaxy and all of these things, it's the crew that piles into the tin can that they're stuck inside in space, and that forced proximity kind of turns you into a sort of family. And I always loved and admired that in those stories and wanted to write it in my own stories.
That's awesome. Thank you. So, okay, a question that we have gotten from a lot of students is about how long it takes to write books. So I'm wondering if you could tell us how long it took to write your first book, if you remember, and then compare that to your more recent books where you kind of know what you're doing a little bit more.
Questionable.
Where that path is worn.
The path is worn. Yeah. And, it really depends on what you consider writing the book. If you're talking about just getting sloppy words down for a first draft, then that's one measure of time. If you're talking about actually revising it into a polished book, that's completely different. I will say the first, the first measure, how long it takes to actually just like vomit the words onto the page, that has stayed fairly consistent throughout my career. And I am a person, I preface this by saying that I am a planner. So I write myself a full synopsis of the book before I ever start. So I know what I'm writing and where I'm going and who my characters are. And I learn a lot about all of this stuff and flesh it out as I'm writing, but I do at least have a map before I start. So when I say that it takes me like roughly 4 to 6 weeks to get out a draft, like just a garbage pile of words draft that has a beginning, middle, and an end, I am not saying that the entire process takes 4 to 6 weeks. I'm saying like before that, I really, planned and thought out a lot and did a lot of like pre-writing work. Everybody writes differently, and there's no like right or wrong way to go about it. For me, the way that works is binge writing for 6 weeks and just getting everything out on the page. That's just the way that I personally work. I know a lot of people like to take their time and go at it at a slower pace, but this is just like the rhythm that works for me. And then I burn out real hard at the end of that 6 weeks, and I need like 2 weeks off, and then I can go back at it and revise. And the revision period is what has really shrunk over the course of my career. The Disasters was revised many times. I don't even remember how many times. And then I got into a writing contest called Pitch Wars, and I revised it there. And then I got an offer from an agent who wanted a revision, so I revised it then. And then we sent it, we sold it to Harper Teen, and I revised it at least 3 times there. So I wrote that book in November of 2014 for National Novel Writing Month, NaNoWriMo, as a binge writer. NaNoWriMo works very well for me. I still use it to this day to get me going when I need to get stuff done. And, you know, from November 2014 to when we sold it in like early 2016 or something, it had been revised that many times. And then it didn't come out till December of 2018. So it was revised. It took a long time for that book to come to life. My second book, Spell Hacker, was very difficult on a lot of levels for me. Second books are awful. Ask any author, they'll tell you the same thing. Second books are the worst because there's just different pressure and you're much more in your head about it. And if it's already under contract, then you're like, oh no, they already gave me money for this thing that doesn't exist. And what if I screw it up? And, you know, there's a whole thing. But same kind of process of, you know, wrote it pretty quickly and then revised it a whole bunch. Guardians of the Galaxy and Firefly are completely different because they are IP novels, intellectual property. They're somebody else's property. Those types of books, no matter who you're writing for, if it's Marvel or Star Wars or whatever, they have incredibly fast turnaround times. I don't know what it is about the production timeline for those books that makes them like this, but both Guardians of the Galaxy and Firefly were written in 4 to 6 weeks. And there was barely any revision, like maybe one round of revision is all we had time for, which is nerve-wracking. I hope those books are okay. I'm pretty sure they're fine. One True Me and You, I had learned a little bit more about what was going on. And so that book, it's a short book. It's, you know, maybe 260 pages or something. So it's a quick read. It's a fun read. And it was a quick and fun writing experience too. So I did revise that one at least one major time. Years after I wrote it, when, you know, in its original incarnation, it was an FF novel. It was 2 female main characters. And then somewhere in the middle intervening time, I was like, oh, hey, I'm non-binary. Oh, hey, I should make this character non-binary. And suddenly the book works. Yeah, that's about it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's plenty. That's lots.
It has sped up, yes.
Yeah. No, I mean I think it's super helpful to hear those kinds of timeframes and be able to set expectations if someone out there is an aspiring writer, kind of knowing what they would be looking at. Yeah. And kind of in line with that, actually, I'm curious to hear what has been the most surprising part of being an author for you.
Ooh, good question. I don't know that I've really thought about this. What is the most surprising part? Yeah, I think maybe how almost disconnected I feel from the books once they come out, and how much I sort of forget about what I have written. If you asked me to give you like a beat by beat breakdown of what happens in the disasters, I'm not sure I could do that anymore. Like I said, I wrote that book in 2014. Like that was a long time ago. And then once the books come out, like, you know, when you go to family gatherings and stuff, one thing everybody loves to ask you is, how is the book doing? And I always say, like, dude, I don't know. Like, they could tell me like, oh, you've sold 10 copies. And I'd be like, great. Is that good or bad? I don't know, you know, because there is this whole like formula behind publishing that is like behind many layers of curtain and smoke that nobody wants you to see. And, you know, there's just like, oh, it's doing fine. I'm like, what does that mean? You know, so like early on, I discovered that trying to understand that kind of stuff and reading, you know, reviews by readers and stuff like that way lies madness. There's no point to doing either of those things. Put your head down and write the next book. You know, I have told my story. I've made it the best I can. It is what I want it to be. I have also learned that the vast majority of 1-star reviews are, this book wasn't what I wanted it to be. And I'm like, fair, that's fine. You know, it was what I wanted it to be. And that's okay for us to have different expectations. So I really have taken a big step back from my books once they are out in the world. And that was a thing that I just had no context for and did not understand before my first book came out.
Yeah, that's surprising for sure.
Yeah.
All right. Well, sadly, we are right at time, but I have one more question. You mentioned that you kind of have come to know what your wheelhouse is and feel what is comfortable for you. And I'm curious, what other types of books or stories do you hope you get a chance to tell, and or what are you working on next?
Yeah. I have like three and a half, maybe four things that I'm hoping to put out on submission this year. And they run the gamut, but they all very much fit into what I've already talked about. So I have a middle grade, like spacey sci-fi book that I really want to get out there. I have an adult sci-fi romance that I would love to get out there. I have a contemporary romance that is kind of in the vein of One True Me and You, but for adults. And then I have what I hope will be kind of a follow-up to the One True Me and You, but instead of, fandom being the geeky element, it's Dungeons and Dragons, because I love it and it's my thing. So I just really want to make all of these books exist. They all do exist in some form or another right now. So if you have any editor friends, tell them, hey, please buy MK England's nerdy books.
All right, everyone out there, you heard MK. Please
Put out the
help
vibes.
them get get good vibes. All right, well, that is a wonderful note to end on. Thank you, MK. Thank you to everyone who is watching. Remember that you can visit vabook.org to explore our full schedule of upcoming Virginia Festival of the Book events, including another event with MK. Don't miss it. And just thank you again for taking the time to spend with us and tell us about your work.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah.